This beautiful woman's name is Young-won. Even though she's walking with her husband, her fearful demeanor draws attention. He leads her to the parking lot, and upon spotting a blind spot out of view of the security cameras, he immediately pulls her into it. He appears respectable on the surface, but in reality, he's an abuser. If anything displeases him, he beats her without hesitation. This time is no different. He doesn't spare her beautiful face or her lower abdomen. Who would know that this couple is the ideal image of a perfect family in Korea? The husband is the second son of the Jaesha Corporation, the largest electronics company in the country, and his wife is the famous actress Young-won. But she doesn't love her glamorous husband at all. The one who holds her heart is our Woo Hyuk. After being abused by her husband, Young-won runs to Woo Hyuk. Only he can soothe her physical and emotional pain. That night, the two share sweet moments together. Seeing this, do you wonder what their relationship really is? Let's rewind to a year earlier. Young-won is driving when she accidentally splashes water on Woo Hyuk. Panicked, she gets out of the car and apologizes. Upon seeing the beautiful woman before him, Woo Hyuk's annoyance almost vanishes. He's about to leave, but overcome with guilt, she calls him back. They end up at a designer clothing store. She picks out an outfit worth millions of won for him, telling him not to be shy and to try it on. After changing, Woo Hyuk goes to the cashier. The employee tells him that the woman has already paid and even gifted him a new pair of shoes. That evening, while Woo Hyuk is out with his senior, attorney Yu Ra, Young-won unexpectedly appears. What a small world. Seeing her, the attorney cheerfully introduces them. Young-won is my sister-in-law, and Woo Hyuk is my junior. The two look at each other awkwardly but greet each other as if they've never met. Just as Young-won is about to leave, her sister-in-law stops her. Since you've run into each other, let's have a few drinks. Take advantage of the fact that Min-ho, your husband, is away on business. During the gathering, a colleague notices Woo Hyuk's designer clothes. He doesn't hide it and explains, "While I was waiting for a ride, a woman passing by splashed dirty water on my clothes. She was rich, so she bought me a whole expensive outfit. I guess she thinks money can buy anything." He says this while pointedly looking at Young-won. Seeing his sarcasm, she retaliates by nudging her friend, causing food to spill all over Woo Hyuk's new clothes. She then pretends to apologize. At this point, everyone comments, "You two are really meant to be. You must have known each other from that incident." It turns out that last year, Woo Hyuk was the reporter who wrote an article about Young-won, claiming her fame was due to the backing of a wealthy figure. Young-won still holds a grudge about that. Unexpectedly, they meet again under these circumstances. She never wanted to see the jerk who smeared her name again, but fate seems to have other plans. When Young-won goes to the courthouse to research details for a new movie script, she runs into him again. He's now a prosecutor. Passing by, he immediately recognizes her, despite her attempts to alter her appearance. At lunchtime, they end up at the same table. Young-won seizes the opportunity to vent her anger. "How dare you say I have a keyball backing me? Were you hiding under my bed? Do you know how hard I've worked to achieve my success?" Young-won chokes up. As she tries to compose herself, a criminal suddenly rushes in and takes her hostage. He demands that Woo Hyuk immediately prepare a car for him. Not wanting to be indebted to him, Young-won tries to free herself. She manages to break free but gets hit and loses consciousness. Woo Hyuk immediately jumps in. With a few swift moves, he subdues the criminal. Seeing Young-won unconscious, he quickly carries her to the hospital. Worried, he waits until she wakes up. Young-won thanks him and offers to treat him to a nice meal. It's clear that after this incident, they've started to shed their prejudices about each other. He smiles and says, "Seeing you like this is unfamiliar. Maybe you should just yell at me like the other day." Unexpectedly, the seemingly stoic man has a playful side. His words lighten the mood between them considerably. At that moment, Young-won's husband arrives. It's clear she's terrified of him. Woo Hyuk, standing beside the bed, also senses something amiss, but her husband puts on a convincing act, solicitously asking about her well-being and thanking Woo Hyuk for saving her. After Woo Hyuk leaves, his facade crumbles. His fake persona is truly frightening. After being discharged from the hospital, Young-won makes good on her promise to treat Woo Hyuk to a meal. However, while cleaning her house, she accidentally knocks over a book under a table. Curious, she opens it to find a hidden storage device inside. The contents leave Young Won aghast. She can't believe her husband is capable of such vile acts. As she reels from the shock, her husband stands watching from the doorway. He says nothing, but silently removes his leather belt. What follows is a brutal assault. Meanwhile, Woo Hyuk waits for Young Won at the restaurant. He calls her, but she's no longer in any condition to answer. After waiting a while longer, he leaves. Outside, he spots Young Won's car and realizes she's inside, crying, but he chooses to leave. Distraught, Young Won goes drinking alone. When she becomes too intoxicated, the staff calls Woo Hyuk. He's found eating instant ramen at a convenience store. Since she's passed out, he has no choice but to get her a hotel room for the night. Intending to leave after she wakes up in the morning, she unexpectedly stirs half an hour later. Tears streaming down her face, she tells him about her life as a keyball's wife. The supposed life of luxury is, in reality, a living hell. Knowing her pain, Woo Hyuk comforts her, and they spend the night together. From then on, fate binds them together. Had they not met a year earlier, perhaps fate would have orchestrated their encounter under different circumstances. Because, one way or another, Woo Hyuk would still become entangled with the Jaesha Corporation. He's currently using the chairman's daughter, attorney Yu Ra, to his advantage. Thanks to her introduction, he attends the family's celebratory party. This is also his opportunity to meet the chairman before the decision is made regarding his joining the company's legal team. The reason for this is Min Ho's recent appointment as the company's director. Soon, he'll become chairman. This worries Min Ho's mother and older brother. The mama's boy older brother is no match for the cunning Min Ho. But if Woo Hyuk becomes his son-in-law, the situation might change. Woo Hyuk's presence at the party creates an awkward atmosphere. The chairman asks everyone to leave so he can speak with him privately. He wants to know why Woo Hyuk left his position as a prosecutor to become a corporate lawyer. There must be a specific reason. Woo Hyuk readily offers his prepared explanation. He aspires to power and status, just like the chairman. Only at Jaesha can he achieve that. The chairman is already aware of his accomplishments. He's highly skilled and well-connected. Therefore, joining Jaesha would undoubtedly bring significant value. The next morning, Woo Hyuk goes to the airport to pick up an important person. It's Ricky, the key witness in his father's case years ago. He was the chairman's former driver and knows everything that happened to his father. But as they reach the parking lot, while Woo Hyuk is on the phone, Ricky is abducted. He quickly gives chase, but the kidnapper is clever, forcing his car to crash into an obstacle. Dazed, Woo Hyuk stumbles out of the car, only to be punched. He's left helpless as the kidnapper takes both the witness and his luggage. At this time, the chairman and Min Ho are on a helicopter for a business trip. Seeing his father cough, Min Ho pours him a cup of hot tea prepared by a servant. Once settled, the helicopter takes off. During the flight, the pilot suddenly experiences discomfort in his throat. The chairman, noticing this, instructs his assistant to give him a cup of the same tea. But as soon as he drinks it, the pilot struggles to breathe and collapses. The co-pilot, unable to control the situation, loses control of the helicopter, which hits a signal tower and plunges into the Han River. This was a nationwide tragedy. The chairman was severely injured and hospitalized. Min Ho was missing, nowhere to be found, and the rest of the passengers didn't survive. Woo Hyuk was devastated when he heard the news. He couldn't let the chairman die like this. His father's case was still unresolved, so he rushed to the hospital. Thanks to his connection with Yu Ra, he was allowed in. The chairman's wife's younger brother said the police gave Min Ho a very slim chance of survival. Upon hearing this, the chairman's wife fainted, unable to cope. Her husband was in critical condition, his life hanging in the balance. Her son was missing without a trace. How could she possibly overcome this shock? When the chairman's wife regained consciousness, she asked everyone to leave the room. She said she was fine and wanted to be alone. It was then that her true colors were revealed. Her brother rushed back into the room when he heard her crying, but they weren't tears of sorrow. She was crying tears of joy. Finally, this day had arrived. Call an emergency shareholders meeting. We must seize this opportunity to take control. The doctors finished the surgery. A rib had pierced the chairman's liver, damaging 40% of it. Everyone needed to prepare for the worst. The eldest son, Su-ho, felt a flicker of joy at the news. Only the daughter was genuinely worried about her father. Woo Hyuk, without even taking a break from his current case, was assigned to handle the accident. He had to do everything in his power to prevent it from becoming a major scandal. The chairman's wife was getting ready to go to the shareholders' meeting when the door suddenly opened, stopping her in her tracks. Min-ho, in the flesh, stood before her. He smirked. "Surprised, mother? Didn't expect me to return safe and sound, did you?" Seeing her husband's return, Young-won's grief felt like a descent into hell. She quickly walked to the stairwell and sat down, weeping. Woo Hyuk witnessed this. They loved each other, but couldn't be together. He could only offer her comfort in times like these. Seeing the woman he loved in tears, he didn't hesitate to kiss her. This tender moment was witnessed by Min-ho from inside the room. How interesting. Once Young-won returned, he decisively pulled her toward the reporters. Seeing him, everyone buzzed with excitement and rushed forward. "Weren't you missing? How are you here?" Min-ho put on a sorrowful face and began to act. He recounted the cause of the incident. It turned out that before the helicopter took off, the chairman received a call from the Blue House. They wanted a representative from the corporation to discuss plans for welcoming a high-level international delegation. So, he had asked his son to stay behind and handle the matter. That's how he escaped the disaster. It was as if fate had spared him. Now, if nothing else happened, he would naturally become the chairman of the corporation. Then, he would slowly deal with his wife's lover. Just you wait. His older brother, upon learning of Min-ho's return, worriedly went to find their mother. But their mother was suffering even more than he was. In the end, Min-ho presided over the shareholders' meeting. If he had orchestrated this whole thing, it was a masterful stroke. At the end of the day, Min-ho went to the hospital to pick up his wife. Now was the time for her to face his wrath. He led her to the parking lot. But instead of putting her in the car, he dragged her to a corner to vent his anger. Min-ho's affectionate facade was all an act. But even if she wanted to escape him, she couldn't. A perfectionist like Min-ho wouldn't allow it. So, Young-won could only grit her teeth and endure. She sought solace in Woo Hyuk's arms. After a passionate interlude, Young-won got in her car and returned home. However, her sister-in-law noticed her unusual behavior. She was standing there smoking, checking her watch. It was exactly 4 a.m. At the Jason Corporation, 2 security guards on patrol noticed the chairman's office door was ajar. This was unusual. They both went in to investigate. A putrid smell hit them, signaling something was wrong. As they fumbled around in the darkness, a figure suddenly rushed out, knocking them to the ground. When they looked up, all they saw was crimson red. Ahead of them lay a body, motionless on the floor. It was none other than Min-ho. This time, he had truly logged out. Not entirely accurately, the younger brother told the chairman's wife that Min-ho had been stabbed in his office. Simultaneously, Young-won and Woo Hyuk also received the news. Everyone was shocked. The chairman's wife went upstairs to inform her eldest son. But when she entered his room, she didn't find him, only a pile of pills on the table. She had a bad feeling. Running into the bathroom, she found her wayward son submerged in the bathtub. She frantically called for help. It was fortunate she went in when she did. Otherwise, he would have lost his life. Woo Hyuk was also called in to investigate Min-ho's death. When he arrived at the crime scene, he discovered the room had no security cameras. The external camera footage from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. had also been stolen. This was hard to believe, especially in such a large corporation. Woo Hyuk continued his investigation, going to the Gresson family home. There, the eldest daughter-in-law mentioned that Min-ho and Young-won had a strained relationship. Furthermore, Young-won had returned home very late that night, around 4 a.m. Back at the office, a colleague showed Woo Hyuk the security footage of Min-ho and Young-won in the hospital parking lot. Woo Hyuk quickly thought of retrieving the car's black box, as it might have captured what happened in that secluded corner. Based on the video, it was highly likely that Young-won was the one who attacked her husband. Now, the investigation would focus on her. Young-won was summoned to the interrogation room. Woo Hyuk was the interrogator. He presented the video of Min Ho assaulting her in the parking lot and demanded an explanation. "Why were you being hit?" Young-won replied, "Min Ho always hit me without reason. I was always the victim in this relationship." But Woo Hyuk didn't ask about the beating. He asked, "Where did you go after you were hit?" This question stunned Young-won. That night, after being abused by Min Ho, she had gone to see Woo Hyuk. After their intimate encounter, she got in her car and drove home. On the way, she received a call from Min Ho. He demanded she come to his office to finalize their divorce papers. So, she immediately went there. However, upon arrival, he continued to torment and torture her. He said he would never divorce her. Now, everything was in his hands, including her. Unable to bear his brutality, she fought back. Unexpectedly, he overpowered her. She could only struggle to break free. If she revealed all of this, she would surely be detained immediately. But she kept it to herself. Woo Hyuk was also trying to protect her. He continued to question her about the time she returned home. Young-won confidently answered, "I got home at 2 a.m. Just as he was about to ask another question, the Jean Corporation's legal team entered. They said Young-won didn't need to answer any further questions. Then, they bailed her out. Exhausted, Young-won returned home. She glanced at a glamorous dress hanging in her closet. Suddenly, memories of the past flooded back. Before marrying Min Ho, she had been a famous actress. At a film awards ceremony, she won Best Actress and became the center of attention. The director took the opportunity to introduce her to influential figures in the industry. When she became too tired, she slipped out to rest on the stairs. Unexpectedly, it was there that she met her future tycoon husband. He pretended to be just a casual observer. He had also just returned from abroad, so he didn't know who she was. Seeing this, Young-won felt at ease and invited him to go out for some fun. They went out together and had a great time, feeling a genuine connection, like true friends. When the two arrived at the restaurant, Woo Hyuk happened to be there as well. At that time, he was working as a reporter. Upon seeing Min Ho, he immediately recognized him as the son of the chairman of the Geisha Corporation. As for the girl with him, Woo Hyuk's friend informed him that she was a currently popular actress. Intrigued by this information, Woo Hyuk quickly pulled his friend away. Only then did Young-won feel comfortable enough to sit and talk with Min Ho. When it was time to part, Min Ho said, "Let's meet again tomorrow." He then proceeded to make a solicitous gesture towards her. Woo Hyuk captured it all. He planned to use it to attack the Geisha Corporation. But of course, Young-won would also be hurt by this. Thanks to him, she would end up marrying the most eligible bachelor in South Korea. The Min Ho case. After the forensic analysis, the conclusion was that Min Ho had been killed with a box cutter. Based on the wounds, they judged that this was not something a woman could have done. Furthermore, the tycoon's high-rise building was heavily guarded, making it very difficult for an outsider to sneak in and commit the crime. Woo Hyuk investigated all the family members. The madam maintained a calm facade, showing no reaction. As for Soo-ho the puppet, he remained as arrogant as ever, telling Woo Hyuk to know his place. Very quickly, the madam announced Min Ho's funeral. This was a funeral to announce his death to the entire nation. Several police officers, under the guise of mourners, attended the funeral. When Soo-ho saw them, he showed contempt. At that moment, a police officer declared, "You are under arrest on suspicion of involvement in the death of Min Ho." The man remained defiant. "You're arresting me without evidence." Just then, Woo Hyuk entered. We found Soo-ho's skin under Min Ho's fingernails. This news shocked everyone present. Soo-ho, panicked, shoved the officer and ran. Woo Hyuk immediately gave chase. Just as Soo-ho got into his car, Woo Hyuk pulled him out. And so, the arrogant man was taken in for questioning. The secret of Min Ho's birth. Upon hearing the news, the madam immediately went to see Woo Hyuk's superior. She demanded to see her son. She whispered to Soo-ho, "You must remain absolutely silent. Don't reveal anything. I will take care of everything." Woo Hyuk was not satisfied. He opened and studied the files of each member of the family. When he looked at the blood types, he discovered a big secret. The next day, he confronted Soo-ho with this information. It turned out that Min Ho was not the madam's biological son. but the chairman's illegitimate child. Woo Hyuk asked. Did you kill Min Ho because you knew he wasn't your real brother and were afraid he would take over the company? Woo Hyuk's words ignited Soo-ho's rage. Despite his lawyer's attempts to stop him, he poured out all his resentment towards Min Ho. Ever since Min Ho had moved in, everything in the house had become gloomy. He was a devil inside. He was always quiet, but his every action was unpredictable. Woo Hyuk took the opportunity to probe further. Is that why you were afraid and eliminated him? But Soo-ho calmly replied. It's true that Min Ho and I had a scuffle the night he died, but it was just a minor argument. It wasn't serious enough for me to kill my brother. The plane crash. Could Soo-ho's words be trusted? Or was it just a story he made up to deceive Woo Hyuk? The team investigating the plane crash found a crucial clue. It was a small bottle of eye drops. Inside was a solution that caused an allergic reaction to an ingredient in the chairman's tea. This had led to the heart attack that killed the pilot instantly. Moreover, the pilot's wife's fingerprints were found on the helicopter. Clearly, something was wrong. Woo Hyuk immediately ordered a search for the woman, but she had already been tipped off. Without hesitation, she got into her car and fled. Unexpectedly, a mysterious figure was waiting for her. So, when the police arrived, she had already disappeared. Manipulated truth? The investigation team immediately held an emergency meeting. The team in charge of the plane crash investigation reported that the pilot's wife was a shopaholic, deeply in debt. After her husband's death, she received a hefty insurance payout. This could very well be the motive for her to cooperate with someone else to carry out the act. As for the Min Ho investigation, they obtained footage of the fight between the two brothers that night. It was likely that during the scuffle, Soo-ho's skin had gotten lodged under Min Ho's fingernails. And so, using the corporation's influence, Soo-ho was released. In front of the press, he once again declared, I have nothing to do with my brother's death. Young-won had also moved out. This was something she had longed for. Now, she was free to do what she wanted, which was to be with the man she loved. Her abusive husband could no longer control her. The two enjoyed spending time together. While visiting a town, Young-won said she wanted to see a close friend, but she left her phone in Woo Hyuk's car. Just then, he received a call from a gynecology clinic. Woo Hyuk quickly went there, claiming to be a family member of the expectant mother. Upon entering, he realized Young-won was having a routine checkup. He was even more surprised to learn she was 3 months pregnant. He hesitated about whether to ask her about it, but ultimately kept it to himself. Meanwhile, the madam had begun a shareholders' meeting to prepare for the election of a new chairman. The corporation was currently facing instability due to a series of incidents involving senior executives. Therefore, only Soo-ho was qualified to fill the vacant chairman position. At this point, a shareholder spoke up. I heard the chairman's will has disappeared. If he doesn't recover, it's not certain that all the assets will belong to Soo-ho. This statement caused Soo-ho to lose control. He lunged at the shareholder. The madam, having anticipated this, immediately called for a lawyer to announce the will. In the event of the chairman's death or serious illness, all his assets would be transferred to his eldest son, Soo-ho. No one could argue further. The written document was crystal clear. Soo-ho assumed his father truly loved him and had therefore left all his assets to him. But the madam's next words left him bewildered. She demanded that her younger son find the missing original will. If it gets out, it will be very dangerous. It turned out the will just presented to the shareholders was a forgery. Only Soo-ho was unaware. Furthermore, the madam blamed him. She claimed that even with Min Ho alive, she would have secured the chairmanship for him. Soo-ho couldn't believe that even his mother didn't believe in his innocence. He left, heartbroken and despairing. At the door, he ran into his younger sister, Yu-ra. She had come at their mother's behest. It turned out the madam wanted her to return to work at the corporation. You're a lawyer, and you let your brother be falsely accused like this? She pressured Yu-ra, saying that Woo Hyuk, disregarding their relationship, was continuing to investigate Soo-ho. This worried Yu-ra. She knew Woo Hyuk was impartial, but the suspect was her brother. She didn't know what to do. Woo Hyuk was still investigating the disappearance of Ricky, the witness in his father's case years ago. Unexpectedly, today he uncovered a valuable clue. The detective investigating Min Ho's case told him about Min Ho's secretary. This secretary had disappeared the same day Min Ho died. Upon receiving information about the secretary, Woo Hyuk remembered him as the person who had kidnapped Ricky. He immediately drove to the secretary's house to investigate. Ricky was there at that moment, but the secretary had left. He called the secretary, demanding he fulfill their previous agreement. He would hand over the incriminating evidence, and the other party would hand over the money. But the secretary refused. He's no longer under anyone's thumb. Surprisingly, when Woo Hyuk arrived, he ran into the secretary leaving. A chase ensued. However, by a stroke of luck, the secretary escaped. Woo Hyuk missed his opportunity. Woo Hyuk returned and ordered Soo-ho's arrest and a search of his house. Soo-ho was now fed up with his family. The wealthy clan suffocated him. The madam, despite her influence, was outmaneuvered by Woo Hyuk. She did nothing but return to her room. Meanwhile, the police discovered a hidden box. Inside was a suspicious-looking storage device. The eldest daughter-in-law, witnessing this, felt uneasy. At the investigation office, Woo Hyuk presented evidence suggesting Soo-ho was his brother's killer. Soo-ho's footprints were found at the crime scene. These were from a pair of shoes he had personally signed for upon purchase. But interestingly, the shoes were found in the possession of the house security guard. It turned out that the morning after the murder, Soo-ho had ordered someone to destroy the evidence, but the guard had seen him. Finding the shoes new and stylish, the guard had taken them. The police had photographed him wearing the shoes while on duty. At this point, it seemed certain that Soo-ho was involved. However, he appeared to be out of sorts, possibly due to withdrawal symptoms. He was not in a fit state of mind to continue the interrogation. Seeing this, Woo Hyuk excused himself for a break. The eldest daughter-in-law, likely aware that the storage device contained something detrimental to her, sought out her mother-in-law to retrieve it. She claimed it held evidence implicating Soo-ho in his younger brother's death. "If you don't act quickly, you might lose your son," she warned. The madam immediately dispatched someone to the prosecutor's office to retrieve the device. Woo Hyuk was still there, having taken a break to wash his face due to exhaustion. During this time, a thief slipped in, stealing his prosecutor's badge and moving the list of evidence seized from Soo-ho's house to a different location. Upon returning, Woo Hyuk sensed something amiss, as if the room had been searched. Panic set in, and he rushed to the storage room. Just then, the thief emerged with the device and fled. The two men collided. The thief bolted, and Woo Hyuk gave chase. Outside, they struggled, but Woo Hyuk was overpowered. A police car approached, prompting the thief to escape. However, as fate would have it, the device he'd stolen was dropped during the scuffle, landing in Woo Hyuk's possession. Unbelievably, Min Ho's husband was having an affair with his sister-in-law, right under their noses. Furious, Woo Hyuk confronted Soo-ho, demanding, "Did you attack Min Ho because you knew about your wife's affair?" Soo-ho merely smirked in response, remaining silent. Later, escorted back to his cell, Soo-ho watched the falling snow and lost control. He broke free from the guards, ran to the balcony, and jumped. Meanwhile, Woo Hyuk consoled a distraught young one, offering comfort and encouraging her to start anew, knowing he couldn't alleviate her suffering. Upon hearing about Soo-ho, Woo Hyuk sought out the eldest daughter-in-law. When presented with the storage device, her surprise was evident. Realizing he'd seen its contents, she confessed. "Min Ho is a master manipulator. He claimed to love only me, but he was after the company. He recorded our intimate moments to blackmail me into handing over my shares. I don't know how Soo-ho found out. This entire family is despicable." Fearing the contents would further hurt young one, Woo Hyuk destroyed the device. The madam, grief-stricken by her son's suicide, vowed to make Woo Hyuk pay. Yu-ra, unable to bear further turmoil, resigned from her law firm to take over the company's legal department. On her first day, all existing lawyers were dismissed. A meeting with her uncle, a close confidante of the madam, alerted her to Hyuk's predicament. She immediately drove to her mother. Meanwhile, Woo Hyuk was being attacked by the madam's men. As a prosecutor, he initially held his own, but eventually succumbed to the relentless assault, losing consciousness. Yu-ra revealed to her mother the reason for the chairman's meeting with Woo Hyuk at the party. He wanted him to revise his will. If Woo Hyuk dies, the will disappears. If it resurfaces later, who knows what will happen. Her words saved Woo Hyuk in the nick of time. The assassin, about to deliver the final blow, received a call from the madam and stopped. Woo Hyuk's life was spared. While driving, Yu-ra received a call informing her that Woo Hyuk was hospitalized. She rushed to his side. Seeing her lover's bruised and battered face, Young-won wept silently. Yu-ra arrived, witnessing the scene with a pang of disappointment. She hadn't realized the depth of their relationship. It dawned on her that they'd always feigned unfamiliarity, though their affection was long-standing. She'd been foolishly oblivious. She had trusted them both implicitly, only to be deceived. Unbeknownst to her, Yu-ra's junior colleagues, after investigating, revealed that Min-ho and Soo-ho had a fight the night before Min-ho's death. Soo-ho's whereabouts after the altercation were unknown. The autopsy placed Min-ho's time of death around 2 a.m. According to the eldest daughter-in-law, Soo-ho was seen at home early that morning. Yu-ra suddenly recalled the daughter-in-law mentioning Young-won, claiming to have seen her sister-in-law return home at 4 a.m. This was a valuable lead. Yu-ra immediately instructed her team to investigate Young-won's activities that day, determined to uncover the truth, both for her brother and her father. That morning, Young-won visited Woo Hyuk in the hospital. Amidst their light-hearted banter, a noise outside alerted Woo Hyuk. The madam had arrived, claiming she only wanted to check on him and hoped such an incident wouldn't recur. If you knew your place, she warned, life would be easier. Undeterred, Woo Hyuk insisted on pursuing the truth. He then received troubling news. His colleagues had traced Min-ho's call logs. The last call was to Young-won, 10 minutes before his death. They also placed her near the company headquarters around that time. Puzzlingly, Young-won claimed to be home at 2 a.m., a clear contradiction. This made Young-won a suspect. The two women encountered each other at the hospital. Seeing Young-won, Yu-ra, despite knowing the reason, inquired about her presence. Young-won simply stated she was visiting a friend. Aware that Young-won was concealing their relationship, Yu-ra, eager for a good show, invited her to visit Woo Hyuk together. "We're acquaintances, after all, aren't we?" she remarked. Upon entering, Woo Hyuk feigned surprise at Young-won's presence. Their secret was out. The awkwardness was palpable, almost comical. Yu-ra questioned Woo Hyuk about her father's will, wanting to know if he possessed it. Woo Hyuk admitted to only having seen it, not keeping it. Yu-ra then turned to Young-won, pointedly asking, "You returned home at 4 a.m. What were you doing, and where were you before then?" Young-won maintained her 2 a.m. arrival, claiming she was simply taking a walk alone. Yu-ra chuckled, knowing it was a lie. A sudden phone call interrupted the conversation. Yu-ra answered and abruptly left. Woo Hyuk seized the opportunity, urging Young-won to tell him the truth, as others wouldn't be as understanding. They were already suspicious. "Just tell me what happened that day," he pleaded, "and I promise to protect you." Young-won remained silent, lacking the courage to confess. The chairman had regained consciousness. Yu-ra rushed to the hospital, but was barred entry. Only the madam was allowed to visit. The chairman requested, "Call Min-ho, and then convene a shareholders' meeting." The madam laughed, relishing her husband's ignorance of their son's death. The chairman's face fell. "That can't be. Absolutely not." Determined to keep him isolated, the madam ordered everyone, including her own daughter, away from his room. Returning home, Woo Hyuk found a letter from Young-won, bidding him farewell and hoping to spare them both further pain. Fearing the worst, he raced to her apartment, only to find her with Min-ho's secretary, who had been missing. Before he could comprehend the situation, they left together. It turned out Young-won and the secretary had made a deal. Flashback to that fateful day. Young-won, attempting to escape her abusive husband, was caught by the secretary. During their drive back, the secretary received a call from the hospital. His wife needed emergency surgery. As an illegal immigrant, finding a donor was difficult. Young-won offered her help in exchange for permanent freedom from Min-ho. The secretary, seeking assurance of her commitment, sought her out. "Just stick to the agreement," he stated, "and everything will remain buried forever." After the two parted ways, Woo Hyuk appeared. He questioned Young-won about her meeting with the secretary. "What did you two meet about?" Young-won was on her way home. She hadn't told him about her pregnancy yet. How could a pregnant woman perform surgery? She didn't want to keep it a secret, so she decided to go back and tell the secretary. Unexpectedly, Woo Hyuk was also there. But the secretary remained calm. He said, "Are you afraid Young-won is the culprit? If you can't handle it, just pretend you don't know anything." With that, he left Woo Hyuk standing there. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the chairman had regained consciousness. He immediately wanted to see Woo Hyuk. By the time his wife arrived, it was too late. Woo Hyuk had beaten her to it. Now, he would soon know the truth about what happened that day. According to Soo-ho's account, Min-ho was his drug supplier. That night, suffering from withdrawal, Soo-ho went to his younger brother for drugs. Unexpectedly, Min-ho refused. He even beat his older brother in front of everyone. Soo-ho had no choice but to return home. But then he received a call, telling him to go to the chairman's office. When he arrived, he found his younger brother lying motionless on the floor. Soo-ho was stunned. He rushed to Min-ho's side, weeping. But when he heard the security guards approaching, he could only hide. Then, he seized the opportunity to escape. Woo Hyuk didn't believe him. He thought Soo-ho was lying. But what Soo-ho said next suggested he truly wasn't the killer. To Soo-ho, Min-ho was the person he cherished most. Unbelievable, right? But ever since they were young, Min-ho had been the one who understood him best. He was always willing to cover for him, no matter what. Even when he knew he was wrongly accused by his older brother, his younger brother never uttered a word. Even after Min-ho went abroad to study, they remained close. Whenever Soo-ho needed advice, he would turn to his younger brother. Even when he learned that his younger brother was having an affair with his wife, Soo-ho didn't care. The marriage was just a business arrangement. There were no real feelings involved. Soo-ho insisted, "I'm not the one who killed Min-ho." Faced with Soo-ho's confession, Woo Hyuk's head spun. Looking at him, he didn't seem like a liar. If Soo-ho wasn't the killer, then who was the real culprit? Upon learning that the chairman had regained consciousness, Woo Hyuk rushed to the hospital. So, the old man was still alive to witness his revenge. While in the hospital room, he told the chairman about Min-ho's death. The chairman, grief-stricken, ordered him to find the murderer at all costs. He vowed to make the perpetrator descend into hell for atonement, to blow them to smithereens. Upon hearing these words, Woo Hyuk thought of his own parents. Who gave you the right to take someone's life like that? Can you just make people disappear at will? You did the same to Song-hun's father, didn't you? You were the one who acted alongside my father back then, weren't you? At this, the chairman was so shocked that he was speechless. He seemed to be deeply affected, only able to utter fragmented sentences. Song-hun, I'm sorry. Because I was so scared. Min-ho's death had deeply wounded the chairman. His mental state was no longer stable. At the trial, Yu-ra defended her brother. She argued that the prosecutors seemed to be overlooking other suspects who were also present at the scene. Furthermore, there was no evidence proving that Soo-ho was the one who directly stabbed Min-ho. Therefore, Soo-ho couldn't be convicted as the murderer in this case. Woo Hyuk, as a prosecutor, should have stood up to object. However, he remained silent. Perhaps he also believed in Soo-ho's innocence. Meanwhile, the pilot's wife, ever since being kidnapped and locked in a cage, had been receiving meals daily. Today, she feigned cutting her wrist, deceiving the guard and escaping. Upon hearing that her son had been acquitted, the chairman's wife once again convened the board of directors, proposing Soo-ho as the successor. A dissenting shareholder raised a question. There are rumors that the chairman has regained consciousness. Why are we still electing a successor? The wife calmly admitted, it's true that he has regained consciousness, but his brain has been damaged. He's no longer stable enough for us to trust. She even arranged a live feed from the hospital room. Everyone witnessed the chairman's current condition firsthand, clearly seeing that he was unable to continue running the company. The shareholders had no choice but to agree to the eldest son's succession. The wife and her younger brother rejoiced at easily securing the succession. As they got into their car, the doors suddenly locked. The chauffeur drove off. The chauffeur was none other than Ricky. After Min-ho's death, He had shifted his target, aiming to give evidence related to the chairman to the wife in exchange for money. Initially, she didn't want to get involved with him. However, Ricky threatened Suho's chairmanship, so she had to compromise. Yu-ra invited Young-won to a restaurant. She presented Min-ho's call logs from before his death. It was clear that Young-won had been present at the chairman's office that night. But Yu-ra wanted to know where she had been before going to the office. How could Young-won reveal what happened between her and Woo Hyuk that night? Even so, Yu-ra had already guessed. She then asked, "Isn't it true that if Min-ho were gone, you could openly love Woo Hyuk?" Young-won remained silent, about to leave. But Yu-ra gave her an ultimatum. "If you obediently disappear, I'll pretend I don't know anything. But if you continue to stubbornly cling to Woo Hyuk, you'll lose everything." Elsewhere, Hyuk was asking his friend to investigate the chairman. He suspected that the chairman was feigning his condition to protect himself. Was this a possibility? The helicopter accident hadn't taken his life, but who knows if the second time wouldn't be so fortunate. Young-won prepared a delicious meal for Woo Hyuk. She also invited their mutual friend to join them for dinner and conversation. Everything was cheerful. They even took photos together to capture the memorable moment. After Hyuk fell asleep, Young-won stood beside him, looking at the man she loved and at their photo together, tears falling from her eyes. She loved him, but to prevent further suffering for everyone, she decided to leave him. Their love would ultimately remain a memory, forever hidden from the light. That day, while the madam was discussing business with a shareholder, Suho suddenly entered. He expressed his desire to take over the chairman's position as soon as possible. Before that, a proper funeral for Min-ho had to be held. He instructed that everything be prepared for the following day, inviting both company shareholders and the investigators involved in the case. The shareholder felt the timeline was too rushed. Suho immediately corrected him. "Never question the chairman's words, just follow them." Intimidated, the shareholder quickly agreed to make the arrangements. Observing her son's demeanor, the madam was pleased. This was the conduct of a future chairman. She then called Young-won to attend. After all, she was still Min-ho's wife and should be present at the funeral. At the ceremony, Suho delivered the eulogy on behalf of the family. But first, he invited his sister-in-law, Young-won, to say a few words in farewell to her husband. She expressed her love for Min-ho. Following her, Suho eloquently expressed his grief for his younger brother. Suddenly, the chairman burst into the funeral, accusing Suho of harming Min-ho, his most beloved son. Young-won comforted him. Yu-ra, witnessing this, initially thought her father had recovered, but he then became incontinent and started speaking incoherently. Staff and his daughter quickly escorted him out. Yu-ra wondered, "How could my father have gotten here?" A staff member then revealed that Suho had ordered the chairman to be brought there. Suho's actions were intended to demonstrate to the shareholders that the chairman was mentally unstable and unable to continue running the company. Meanwhile, Woo Hyuk received a call. The caller informed him that the pilot's wife had been located. He and a colleague immediately set off to retrieve her. Upon arrival, they quickly brought her back to Seoul for her safety. She could be a crucial witness in the case. Yu-ra's junior colleague, investigating Young-won's bank card spending records, discovered she visited the obstetrics and gynecology department twice every month. Yu-ra was shocked was Young-won pregnant. She immediately confronted her sister-in-law. Yu-ra demanded to know who the father was. If it was Woo Hyuk's, then Young-won was despicable for having an affair while still married. The more she thought about it, the more Yu-ra hated her sister-in-law and vowed to make her pay. The stress caused Young-won severe abdominal pain. Fortunately, her close friend noticed and promptly called a doctor. After the examination, the doctor assured them it wasn't serious and she just needed rest. As the doctor left, Yu-ra was waiting. She confronted Woo Hyuk. "Is it your child?" Woo Hyuk calmly replied, "I don't care. Whosever child it is, I still love Young-won." Hearing him say those words, Yu-ra was devastated. It turned out that all along, only she had been in love. Woo Hyuk had never had any feelings for her. With the pilot's wife secured, Woo Hyuk and his colleague planned their next move. He suspected the madam and Suho were behind the helicopter crash. He decided to leak this information to a subordinate. If there was a mole, the other side would surely react. He also asked his colleague to create a sketch of the assassin who had infiltrated the investigation headquarters. Simultaneously, they discreetly assembled a new special forces team to apprehend him. They also installed surveillance cameras in the hospital room where the pilot's wife was recovering. Now, all they had to do was wait for their trap to spring. After a long wait, a suspicious man approached the hospital room. As he entered, everyone rushed in to subdue him. But then they realized this wasn't the assassin. Woo Hyuk anxiously called to check on the pilot's wife's whereabouts. The caregiver said she was fine. Just then, the woman snatched the phone. She claimed that everything was orchestrated by the madam's younger brother. Hearing this, Hyuk's heart sank. It seemed their target wasn't the pilot's wife after all, but the madam's brother. This was bad. They immediately rushed to find him. By this time, the assassin they were tracking had already arrived at his house. The madam's brother was still restlessly awake. Hearing a noise, he sat up in fear. By the time Woo Hyuk arrived with the police, he had vanished. The madam pressured high-ranking officials in the prosecutor's office, causing Woo Hyuk's superiors to abruptly demand he halt the helicopter crash investigation. Despite his vehement protests, his superiors dismissed him. The next day, they held a press conference. They announced that the pilot's wife was behind the crash, claiming she intentionally caused it to collect her husband's life insurance. They declared the incident had nothing to do with the Jaysha Corporation and that the pilot's wife was the sole perpetrator. Just like that, the helicopter crash investigation was hastily concluded. The reporters present clearly sensed something was amiss. They persistently questioned the prosecutors, who only responded with evasiveness. The team, especially Hyuk, was deeply disturbed by this. He was furious beyond words. He vowed not to let this go so easily. Yu-ra received news of her uncle's disappearance. Furthermore, a colleague informed her that the pilot's wife had specifically named her uncle as the instigator in the helicopter incident. Yu-ra was smart enough to guess that her mother was connected to her uncle's disappearance. She rushed home to confront her mother, who naturally denied everything, challenging Yu-ra to bring forth any evidence. However, Yu-ra's sister-in-law had overheard their mother talking the previous night, saying that it all happened because her uncle wasn't cautious enough. Why corner yourself like that? She was terrified, realizing that this could happen to her too. The police, reviewing surveillance footage from the day Min-ho died, noticed a drone flying around the building. A colleague then recalled accidentally bumping into a box of similar drones belonging to a paparazzi photographer who had been arrested. It was a stroke of luck. Retrieving the drone's memory card, they discovered a priceless video. On the night of Min-ho's incident, Young-won, his wife, was also present at the scene. More importantly, she was holding a weapon, pointed towards her husband. Seeing this image, Woo Hyuk froze, his mind going blank. His colleagues swiftly mobilized to arrest Young-won. She was on her way to the airport. Upon arrival, she saw Woo Hyuk waiting. Before she could react, she was surrounded by police. A colleague quickly handcuffed her. Seeing his lover in this situation, he was powerless. The evidence was overwhelming. He could only suppress his grief and ask her to cooperate with the investigation. The madam also received news of Young-won's arrest. Woo Hyuk, knowing Young-won had her reasons, concealed the truth about that night. He promised to protect her, no matter the cost, as long as she told him everything that happened. Young-won, unwilling to implicate him further, cruelly claimed she never loved him, stating she only needed security. Woo Hyuk knew she was saying this to protect him, but he was determined to uncover the truth. Woo Hyuk stayed up all night studying the case details. He wanted to quickly find strong evidence to exonerate Young-won. However, his superior wanted to halt the investigation to protect his reputation and scheduled a press conference that very morning. News spread that Young-won had been arrested as a suspect in her husband's murder. Reporters crowded the gates of the prosecutor's office to cover the story. In a short time, the news of Young-won harming her husband was everywhere. Min-ho's secretary was extremely worried when she heard the news. His wife was waiting for her to perform surgery. Min-ho's mother, however, didn't miss the opportunity. She immediately called high-ranking officials, asking them to ensure Dong-on, presumably Min-ho, received appropriate punishment. As a mother who had lost her son, she couldn't bear it. She only wished to see the murderer brought to justice quickly. Her acting wasn't bad either. If Young-won was convicted, there would be no obstacle left for her Suho. But Suho believed otherwise. He was convinced Won wasn't the killer. The eldest daughter-in-law didn't take sides, but wanting to mend her relationship with her husband, she told Suho about his mother's unusual behavior before Min-ho disappeared. From her perspective, this couldn't be unrelated to her mother-in-law. Furthermore, if his mother didn't even care about her younger son, she could easily be capable of harming Min-ho. The eldest daughter-in-law was using her husband as both a shield and a pawn in her struggle against her mother-in-law. Woo Hyuk entered the room, presenting evidence piece by piece to help Young-won. He had discovered she'd hired a lawyer to file for divorce from her husband. Clearly, she had gone to see him that night to discuss this. He had also found out that she had been to the hospital multiple times for treatment. These were all injuries from Min-ho's domestic abuse. Woo Hyuk was trying to steer the narrative towards self-defense, not premeditated murder. He tried to paint the most favorable picture possible. Young-won brought the divorce papers to Min-ho that night due to their unhappy marriage. He refused, assaulted her, and she reacted in self-defense when cornered. Despite Woo Hyuk's efforts, Young-won remained silent. She neither confirmed nor denied anything. With her silence, the prosecutor's office had no choice but to issue an arrest warrant. Dejected, Woo Hyuk returned home. As he reached the gate of his apartment building, he encountered a murder scene. He got out of his car and approached the victim. It was Ricky. So, he hadn't escaped his mother-in-law's reach after all. It turned out he had finalized the details with her about the location for the exchange of money and goods. But unexpectedly, upon arrival, he was ambushed by her men. Cornered, he ran into a nearby restroom. Unbeknownst to him, the assassin disguised as a police officer was already inside. By the time Ricky realized it, it was too late. Falling into his hands meant bad luck. However, Ricky was surprisingly resilient. He managed to escape and immediately called Woo Hyuk to meet. He promised to reveal the whole truth about the person who harmed his father years ago. But Woo Hyuk had Young-won's final interrogation at that same time. If she remained silent, she would be imprisoned. Woo Hyuk was torn between two choices, the truth about his father's case and the woman he loved facing imprisonment. He didn't know what to choose. Ultimately, he chose Young-won, the woman he was currently trying to protect. Thus, he missed the most crucial witness in his father's case. Ricky was too reckless, unaware of the madam's ruthlessness. Someone like her would never allow him to control the situation. After all, the evidence in Nick's possession would disappear forever. The next day, the madam sent her trusted lawyer to meet with Young-won. The lawyer assured her that he would do everything in his power to lessen her sentence. But Young-won requested a meeting with her mother-in-law. Knowing she wouldn't come, Young-won wrote a note and asked the lawyer to deliver it. She was confident that once the madam read it, she would rush to see her. Skeptical, the lawyer nevertheless delivered the note. The madam's expression shifted upon reading it, and she immediately ordered a car to take her to the prosecutor's office. It turned out that on the night of Min-ho's incident, his secretary had also been present at the scene. He was the one who cleaned up, erasing all traces of Young-won. His motivation was still to ensure she kept her promise to operate on his wife. While the two were in the car, the secretary left an envelope before leaving. Inside were photos of Young-won and Woo Hyuk that Min-ho had hired someone to take. There was also a document Chairman Jin's will. Young-won used the will as leverage against her mother-in-law. If she could get her out of jail, she would hand over the will. Otherwise, she would make it public. In the will, Min-ho was named the sole heir to the entire Jin Corporation. The madam scoffed, surprised by her daughter-in-law's naivete. Min-ho was dead, and she herself had been arrested for his murder. So who would inherit everything? It seemed she was still too inexperienced to play games with her. However, Young-won's next words wiped the smug look off the madam's face. She revealed that she was pregnant with Min-ho's child. While she couldn't inherit, her child could. The tables had turned. It seemed luck was on Young-won's side. The madam summoned her lawyers to handle the situation. She needed to get her daughter-in-law out of jail at any cost. But it wouldn't be easy. Seeing this, Yu-ra offered to handle it personally. The madam then gave her the phone number of an important contact, her long-time informant. On her way home, the madam threw the murder weapon into the Han River. The secret of the past incident would be buried forever. Yu-ra went to meet the informant her mother had recommended. From now on, she needed to know every move within the prosecutor's office. However, the identity of this cunning informant remained a mystery. But based on a lipstick mark, it was likely a woman. Upon returning to her office, Yu-ra received an envelope. Inside was data from Woo Hyuk's computer, sent by the informant. She noticed a locked folder. It must be important. She sought out a man and asked him to unlock it for her. Initially, he refused, citing illegality. But when Yu-ra offered him 2 million won for just 30 minutes of work, he immediately agreed. Soon, he delivered the contents of the folder. It turned out to be information Woo Hyuk had gathered on the Gene Corporation. Furthermore, she discovered a news article about her father's case from 2 years prior. It turned out she was just a pawn in Woo Hyuk's game. He had approached her for revenge, not out of genuine affection. How bitter. She hadn't expected this day to come so soon. Woo Hyuk returned home after work and overheard a cell phone ringing nearby. Upon closer inspection, it was coming from the mailbox downstairs. It was Ricky's phone. He checked the recent calls. He discovered that before calling him, Ricky had contacted the madam. He immediately suspected that Ricky had been eliminated by her. The phone also contained pictures of the murder weapon and a recorded audio file. It turned out Ricky was being pursued by a hitman that day. Knowing his days were numbered, he decided to deliver the truth to Woo Hyuk. Exhausted and at his wit's end, he placed his cell phone in a mailbox downstairs. In the recording, Ricky revealed to Woo Hyuk that he was the chairman's driver. After Woo Hyuk's father was murdered, the chairman tasked Ricky with cleaning up the scene to make it look like an accident. Unexpectedly, Ricky used the murder weapon to blackmail the chairman. He received a large sum of money on the condition that he leave the country and never return. Ricky hadn't been back in 20 years, and the person who murdered Woo Hyuk's father was the chairman's wife. Upon learning the truth, Woo Hyuk was furious. He rushed to confront her, demanding to know why she killed his father. The chairman's wife was terrified. Only then did she realize he was Cha Song-hyun's son. She confessed to taking his father's life. However, if she never revealed her reasons, it would remain a secret forever. Enraged, Woo Hyuk directly asked, "Were you afraid my father's company would rival Gene, so you had him killed?" Despite his obvious distress, she remained calm and said nothing. Then, using the excuse that he was trespassing, she called security to have him removed. It was only then that her fear became apparent, the composure she had maintained now gone. If she did nothing, Woo Hyuk would undoubtedly drag her down with him. He wouldn't let this go. The next day, she immediately contacted the hitman. First, she gave him a severe reprimand. His professionalism had led to Woo Hyuk uncovering the truth. Therefore, he had to make Woo Hyuk disappear without a trace, no matter the cost. "I should have gotten rid of him back then. Then I wouldn't have this obstacle in my way." After learning Woo Hyuk's true identity, Yu-ra went to see Young-won. "We were both deceived by him." Woo Hyuk approached people at Gene with a purpose revenge for his father's murder. She then handed Young-won a stack of documents from Woo Hyuk's files. Young-won didn't understand what her sister-in-law meant until Yu-ra explained everything. Woo Hyuk was Cha Song-hyun's son, the founder of Ingu Electronics. But that company had been absorbed by Gene long ago. Woo Hyuk believed the chairman of Gene was responsible for his father's death and had been plotting revenge for the past 30 years. Young-won refused to believe what Yu-ra was saying. But her sister-in-law produced a file on Young-won that Woo Hyuk had compiled. He had investigated her and knew about the strained relationship between her and Min-ho. That's why it was so easy for him to get close to her and use her for his own ends. Yu-ra left, leaving Young-won standing there, stunned. She didn't know who to believe anymore. Knowing Yu-ra had visited Young-won, Woo Hyuk rushed over. They met at the door. Yu-ra claimed she was Young-won's defense attorney, but her true intentions were different. She wanted to handle the case to ensure Young-won received the appropriate punishment. But she knew that to get to Young-won, she had to separate Woo Hyuk from the investigation. So, she sent photos of Woo Hyuk and Young-won together to his superiors. The implication was clear. A prosecutor involved in a case shouldn't have a romantic relationship with the suspect. It compromised his objectivity. She used this to threaten his superiors. Finally, they were forced to remove Woo Hyuk from the prosecutor's office. They reluctantly placed him on indefinite sick leave, effective immediately, barring him from any further involvement in Min-ho's case. Woo Hyuk resigned himself to packing his belongings and leaving the office. At the door, he saw Yu-ra standing there. Her smug look told him she was up to something. Woo Hyuk hurried back to Young-won's office and warned her about Yu-ra's scheme. Yu-ra actually wanted her in jail, but now she was only concerned with whether he had been using her all along. Wasn't it true? Hadn't he treated her like a tool for his revenge? Woo Hyuk was stunned that the woman he loved knew. He could only admit that he initially approached her with an ulterior motive, but his feelings for her were now genuine. Unfortunately, Young-won didn't believe him, yelling at him to leave. In the end, she was the fool, used without even realizing it. Young-won was taken to the detention center. Woo Hyuk wanted to visit, but she refused. Now, with no way to protect Young-won from Yu-ra, he took a desperate gamble and went to see the madam. Woo Hyuk knelt and begged her to save Young-won, promising never to inquire about his father's case if she were released. The madam was surprised to see Woo Hyuk abandon the truth he'd pursued for so long for Young-won's sake. So, they had fallen deeply in love. He was willing to let go of his hatred for her. But the madam refused his plea. Instead, she would tell him the truth about Cha Song-hyen's case. It turned out that years ago, his father and the madam had a tragic love affair. They fell in love while both were married. They truly wanted to be together, vowing to leave everything behind and run away. However, the madam knew his father valued family and couldn't abandon his wife and children. So, she brought a weapon with her. If he didn't show up, she would end her own life. But his father did come. Only, he wasn't there to run away with her, but to tell her he couldn't bring himself to leave his family. Although the madam had prepared herself mentally, it was still too difficult to accept. In a fit of jealousy, she lost control and attacked him. Ricky, then a trusted confidant tasked by the chairman with handling the aftermath, took a bribe and then double-crossed her. This was the truth Hyuk had been chasing for 30 years. His father had died for that forbidden love. Now, revealing the truth wouldn't change anything. Returning home, Woo Hyuk discarded all the documents related to the Jaesha Corporation. He didn't know if his actions were right or wrong, but all he wanted was to save Young-won. The next day, someone knocked on Woo Hyuk's door. Surprisingly, it was the madam's younger brother. He had sensed something was amiss that night and escaped by jumping from the balcony. He had fled to a remote location, but the madam's men pursued him relentlessly. Desperate, he sought Woo Hyuk's help. He confessed that his sister had orchestrated the helicopter incident, but Woo Hyuk, unable to think clearly, angrily sent him away. The following day, he met Young-won's friend. She asked why he wasn't doing anything to help Young-won. Could he stand by and watch her be convicted? What about the baby she was carrying? How could he bear it? Her words seemed to awaken him. If the madam wouldn't accept his proposal, he would fight her to the end. He contacted a friend and asked for his help. They located the madam's brother's hiding place to ensure his safety. The brother had to hand over all the evidence he possessed to Woo Hyuk. Woo Hyuk then instructed him to call the madam. Hearing her brother's voice, she was overcome with worry. Following Woo Hyuk's instructions, the brother quickly arranged a meeting place. It was the temple where Woo Hyuk's parents rested. When the madam arrived, Woo Hyuk appeared as well. Based on Soo-ho's investigation results from the contents under Min-ho's fingernails that day, they discovered traces of heroin in Soo-ho's system. If this information were to get out, what would the shareholders think about a drug addict becoming chairman? Even if Soo-ho escaped this time, Woo Hyuk would remain determined to pursue him. Given any opportunity, he would overthrow Soo-ho. For the madam, perhaps her son was her only concern. So, she decided to set Young-won free. Looking at her son before her, she knew he was a man of his word. If his father had possessed such resolve, her fate might have been different. She ordered the assassin to stop the assassination attempt on Woo Hyuk. She would wait until Young-won was released, and then she would have them experience the pain of eternal separation, leaving Woo Hyuk to bear the grief for the rest of his life. With her intervention, Young-won was indeed declared innocent by the court. Young-won, also adhering to the agreement, immediately handed over the chairman's will to her mother-in-law. Thus, their relationship would end completely there. Wandering aimlessly on her way home, sitting at the bus stop, a fragmented memory resurfaced. It turned out that on the night of Min Ho's death, she had indeed threatened him with a weapon, but she was quickly subdued by Min Ho. He used sweet words to keep her by his side, but she had already seen through his lies. She asked, "Even if I'm carrying someone else's child, will you still love me?" Hearing this, the demon within him instantly arose, grabbing and choking her. Young-won struggled, feeling like she was about to lose consciousness, when the secretary appeared. It was he who had attacked his own boss. After getting Young-won out, he cleaned the scene to erase any trace of evidence. Everything the secretary did was to ensure she could perform surgery on his wife. Therefore, upon seeing Young-won released from court, the secretary planned to kidnap her. Now, after remembering everything, Young-won walked to the main road. Across the street was the man she loved. The pedestrian light blinked green, and as they walked toward each other, a car sped towards them. Woo Hyuk quickly embraced Young-won, shielding her. Both fell to the ground. The secretary quickly got out of the car, pulled her into his vehicle, and drove away. Woo Hyuk urgently called a friend to bring a car and follow. A chase ensued, but the cunning secretary easily lost them. The secretary's wife's condition in the hospital was critical. He needed to bring someone to perform the surgery quickly. But just then, Young-won revealed she was pregnant. She wanted to keep the baby and couldn't perform the surgery. The secretary fell silent, but his wife couldn't wait any longer. In the end, he decided to take Young-won to perform the surgery anyway. Woo Hyuk asked his colleagues to track down the secretary's car. He also requested their assistance. At that moment, a female colleague offered a clue. She mentioned a name from Young-won's call log, Beauty, likely meant to be Moji. After investigating Bujimoji, they learned that she had been seriously ill and hospitalized for a long time, with the secretary covering her medical expenses. But she had recently been discharged. Furthermore, they discovered that Young-won and Moji had undergone compatibility testing for a transplant. So, the secretary was likely taking Young-won to the hospital for the surgery. Upon hearing this, Woo Hyuk asked his colleagues to find the phone number of the doctor where they had the tests done. From there, they could find a lead on Young-won. Just then, he spotted the secretary's car passing by. He had already switched to an ambulance for easier travel. Woo Hyuk immediately drove his car to block their path, forcing them to stop. A fight ensued, and he ultimately knocked the secretary to the ground. Thinking Young-won was finally safe, they were suddenly attacked by a group of people and knocked unconscious. It turned out the assassin had been tailing them the entire time, waiting for the opportune moment to capture them both. Hyuk eventually regained consciousness, finding himself tied up. Someone brought in a television, and before he could understand what was happening, Young-won's image appeared on the screen. She was bound and trapped in a cage. Seeing her like that, Woo Hyuk was heartbroken and felt utterly helpless. Upon learning of Young-won's kidnapping, he immediately suspected his mother's involvement. Furious, he confronted her. She didn't outright confess, but her words heavily implied her complicity. Yu-ra tried to intervene, but her mother-in-law dismissed her, angrily ordering her to leave. Left to her own thoughts, Yu-ra finally decided to call the police. However, the secretary snatched the phone away and confined her to a room under strict supervision, determined to prevent her from interfering with the next day's chairman election. Worried about Young-won's safety, Woo Hyuk seized a moment when the guard wasn't looking to reach for a card in his wallet, using it to cut the ropes binding him. When the guard returned, Woo Hyuk swiftly overpowered him. Though the guard put up a fight, he was ultimately defeated. Suspecting Young-won might be held at the same location where the captain's wife was previously imprisoned, Woo Hyuk called his colleagues for backup and set off for the location himself. There, Woo Hyuk once again faced the assassin. Fueled by rage, he managed to completely overpower him this time. He rushed to Young-won's side, but she had lost consciousness from exhaustion. Fortunately, he got her to the hospital in time, saving her life. The assassin was apprehended, but despite Woo Hyuk's questioning, he remained silent. Though he knew his mother was behind the ordeal, he had no way to prove it. On the day of the election, the company's board members were to vote on Soo-ho's succession as chairman. Contrary to his mother's expectations, very few voted in favor. She immediately stood up, angrily questioning the shareholders. Losing her composure, she demanded an explanation. Soo-ho then stepped forward to reveal the truth. He had orchestrated the outcome, holding a secret meeting beforehand. He confessed his inadequacy for the role and urged them to choose someone more capable for the company's future. He had transferred all his shares to that person, none other than his sister, Yu-Ra. With the shareholders' support, Yu-Ra was nominated as the new chairman of Gene Corporation. His mother was naturally furious. She retreated to a room to compose herself, only to be confronted by her daughter-in-law, who brought red wine to toast the occasion. She gloated, announcing her plans to leave with Suho and live happily ever after, leaving her mother-in-law alone in the cold, empty mansion. Enraged by these taunts, his mother grabbed a wine bottle and struck her daughter-in-law's head. Her body crumpled to the floor. Grief-stricken, the mother stumbled out of the room, where her son was waiting. He embraced her, offering comfort. He confessed his mistakes and expressed his hope for their family's future happiness. As she stroked his face, she uttered that it was too late, far too late. Suho then noticed the chilling red stain on his mother's hand. He suddenly felt uneasy, pulled away from his mother, and rushed into the room. There, he found his wife lying motionless on the floor, no longer breathing. Suho trembled and burst into tears. At that moment, Woo Hyuk arrived with officers to arrest the chairman's wife. Finally, this cruel woman would pay for her crimes. However, the assassin from the hospital had vanished without a trace. Without a witness, they couldn't convict her. In the previous incidents, the secretary, after kidnapping Young-won, hadn't been able to perform the surgery on his wife. After taking care of her funeral arrangements, he was arrested as the perpetrator in Min-ho's case. After everything that had happened, Young-won decided to leave and start a new life far away. Knowing he couldn't stop her, her close friend could only wish her a safe journey. Woo Hyuk arrived too late. Learning of Young-won's departure, he rushed out, but he couldn't see her one last time. A year later, Woo Hyuk resigned as a prosecutor to become a lawyer. Yu-Ra, knowing this, deliberately attended his court session to see him. Just like their first meeting, although he seemed sleepy before the trial, he immediately became professional once it began. After the session, she asked him if he had any news about Young-won, but seeing his somber face, she knew there was still no word. Yu-Ra had now let go of her hatred. She hoped he would soon find Young-won and bring her happiness. At the prosecutor's office party, the chief announced Prosecutor Kim's promotion. This woman was, in fact, the former informant for the chairman's wife and Yu-Ra. Now, to express her gratitude, Yu-Ra had used her influence to help her reach a higher position. After his wife's death, Suho returned to painting, his childhood passion. Before embarking on a new journey, he visited the chairman and gave him an oil painting of their family of 5, hoping to evoke happy memories. It was unclear if the chairman had truly regained consciousness, but perhaps this state was best for him now. Woo Hyuk visited the chairman's wife in jail. Despite being imprisoned, she remained arrogant and declared she would never give up on her revenge against Woo Hyuk and Young-won. Woo Hyuk then revealed a truth to her. The chairman had long recognized Min-ho's ambition and cruelty. Though he loved his son, he knew that if Min-ho took over, the fate of the company would be uncertain. Therefore, he had called Woo Hyuk to secretly amend his will, choosing Suho as his successor. It turned out that her greed had led her to destroy everything. It was fate. The truth was out, but it was too late to turn back. Now, she would live out the rest of her days in torment and regret. After a long time, Young-won's close friend received a message from her with a picture, saying she was doing well. Through the image, they discovered her location, Osaka, Japan. They immediately told Woo Hyuk, who rushed there to find her. No matter how vast the city, if their love was strong enough, they were bound to find each other. Seeing the silhouette of his beloved, they embraced emotionally. After everything, they would start a new life together, filled with happiness and lifelong peace.